Hey, what's up, everybody? Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to the Daily Check-In for May 20th, 2020. So it's 2020. That's pretty awesome. I'm pretty excited about that. And I may have botched something down there and it says May 19th in the title. I'll fix that later. But the important thing is that it is May 20th. It's Wednesday. I'm excited because I like Wednesdays. And my topic today is one that was submitted by a viewer. They wanted to know my opinion on who's going to win the multi-cloud war, which is an interesting question, and I think you'll be surprised by the answer. Before I get into the topic, few housekeeping items. So the first thing is, don't forget that I also offer this live stream as a separate podcast audio only feed. So if you like the daily check-in, but you prefer an audio format, you just get tired of looking at my beautiful face, that's fine. You can go over to anchor.fm and find the podcast there, or just search in your podcatcher of choice. You will be able to find it. Just search Ned in the Cloud. No problem. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I have recently updated the YouTube channel and organized the daily check-ins into a number of different playlists. So if you want to just get my take on different tech analysis stuff, there's a tech analysis playlist. If you just care about Terraform Tuesdays, good news, there's a Terraform Tuesdays playlist. And the lists go on. As I add new topics, I'm going to create new playlists. So you'll see that on the YouTube site. You can click through and it makes things a little more discoverable. Now that I'm up to, this is episode 36 of the Daily Check-In, that's a lot of content to get through. That's 360 minutes or 6 hours. That can't possibly, yes, that is right, of content. Maybe I'll make it a little bit easier for you to distill down the thing that you care about. All right. Let's check in with each other. How we doing? How are you getting along? Have you started a big new project? Have you just been staying afloat? I'm curious how people are dealing now that we're into month 3 of the lockdown. Maybe things have started easing up where you are. Let me know how you're doing in the comments, or, hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm just curious to see how things are going for people in other parts of the world. With that out of the way, let's get into the topic for today, the multi-cloud war. So the question that came from one of my listeners was through, I believe, Twitter, and he just asks, hey, what do you think? Who's going to win the multi-cloud war? And I thought about that for a minute, and I'm not sure that that's the correct way to frame what's going on with all the different public cloud providers. So let's take it as a given. There's basically the 3 big public cloud providers. There's AWS, which is the biggest. Azure, which is a little bit smaller, though it's hard to tell these days. Azure's definitely a little bit smaller, but then they include Office 365, and that muddies the water. So let's leave O365 out of the equation. So just Azure and AWS, and then you have GCP. And so those are the big 3, and everything else sits below that. I know Oracle has aspirations and Alibaba's growing, but let's just deal with those 3 for the moment. Are they in a war? They're competitors, yes, but I don't think that they're in a war, and I don't think that there's going to be a victor. Stay with me on this because I'm going to use an analogy. We're going to look at what's going on with soda over the last, or pop, or soft drinks, whatever you want to call it, over the last 100 years. Now, when you think of pop or soda or whatever you call it, you probably think of Coca-Cola. And that is the biggest soft drink company in the world. And their main competitor, who's that? It's Pepsi. There's a really good explainer YouTube video that Cheddar put up that talked about how Pepsi and Coke aren't actually at war with each other. They target 2 different demographics of people, for the most part. Pepsi tends to go towards the young, hip, constantly changing, looking for the new vibe kind, and then Coca-Cola is about tradition. And, the one time they tried to change the formula, people had a conniption fit, and then they got the big punch back with Coca-Cola Classic, which that's marketing brilliance by itself. But my point is, they kind of target 2 different markets of people, and those who are Pepsi drinkers tend to stay Pepsi drinkers, and those that are Coke drinkers tend to stay Coke drinkers. So in that regard, they are competitors to a certain degree, but most people have already kind of laid down their camp in that regard. Now, how do they expand and grow as a company? Well, both of them offer new kinds of drinks and branch out into new areas. So, as you saw bottled water becoming more of a thing in, 20 years ago, what happened? Coca-Cola came out with Dasani, which is their own bottled water, and Pepsi has, I'm sure, their own bottled water. So they differentiated. How does this all tie back to the public cloud war? In this analogy, I would call, and this is odd here because I'm not talking about sizing, but I would say that Azure and Microsoft is the Coke in this conversation. They go after the traditional enterprises, and they're an older company overall. So when you look at it from that perspective, even though they have a smaller market share today, they do have that traditional approach. And those who are very comfortable in the Microsoft ecosystem feel equally comfortable when they move over to Microsoft Azure. AWS is kind of the Pepsi of it. They're a younger company and they try to appeal to the developer and the startup and those kinds of organizations. And they ran into a bit of a challenge as they try to sell into the enterprise because it's a different sales motion, one that Microsoft Azure and Microsoft as a whole already has down pat for the most part. That's also something that Google has struggled with. And I guess Google in this is maybe Segrams? I don't really know. So the analogy kind of falls apart there. So all of these different companies are in competition with each other. But the important thing to remember is that we should all be buying overpriced fizzy sugar water. Wait, no, I'm wrong. That's not the point. The point is there doesn't need to be a winner because this is not a zero-sum game. The idea behind a zero-sum game is that there's only a limited amount of resources, and for you to win or to collect more of those resources, that necessarily means someone else has to lose. That is not the case for the cloud computing marketplace. The market continues to grow as more people adopt public cloud, and demand for public cloud resources continues to increase. So while we can talk about percentages of the market, the fact is both AWS and Microsoft Azure and even Google are all growing as cloud computing companies simultaneously. So there doesn't need to be a winner. And in fact, it's in their... Oh, and I set off my Google Cloud. That's hilarious. I know what Google Cloud is. All right. So it is in the best interests of all three of those and other public clouds to educate and bring awareness and increase public cloud adoption across the board because they want to grow that pie bigger, and in the process of growing that pie bigger, also grow their individual market shares and their overall revenue. So that's important to kind of unpack there is while there is competition between the different public clouds, at the end of the day, they're all after the same common goal, which is to broaden the adoption of public cloud resources and grow their share of that pie, but just grow the size of their revenue overall. Okay. Now, there is something interesting that's happening under the covers a little bit, and I probably don't have time to get into it too deeply in this daily check-in, but I did want to bring up this topic, and that is the commoditization of public cloud resources. If you think about a commodity, it's something that is produced in massive quantities, and there's not a whole lot of differentiation between two different vendors. Vendor A's product is very much like vendor B's products. Think of power generation. When you generate electricity, there's no difference in the electricity that's delivered by one provider versus another. The way they generate it might be different, but the actual electricity itself, it's just electrons. It's the same, right? Public cloud right now is trying to differentiate itself by introducing a lot of software as a service features within each public cloud to try to attract people and also show that they're not just a commodity. Now, the wrench in that is Kubernetes. Kubernetes can consume any of the public clouds purely as compute, storage, and networking, which makes them commodity. And in fact, the more alike the public clouds can be, the easier it is to deploy Kubernetes across any of those environments. And I have seen multiple SaaS providers, software as a service providers, choose to build their own Kubernetes clusters in the public cloud instead of using the EKS or AKS or GKE, because they want to have that full control and simple portability and flexibility of deployment for their application so they can move things around. With that in mind, to a certain degree, as Kubernetes adoption goes up, the commoditization of public cloud also goes up, and you might see a change in strategy when it comes to how pricing is approached in the public cloud and how products are produced for the public cloud. So that probably deserves a lot more analysis than I'm giving it right now. If we get back to the central premise, who's going to win the cloud war? I think all of them are going to win the cloud war because all of them will grow the market and make more money. And that's both my short-term and long-term prediction. So that's all I got. If you think I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. If you have a different perspective, I want to hear about it. So hit me up on Twitter, on LinkedIn. It's Ned1313 on Twitter. And until tomorrow, stay healthy and stay safe, everybody. Thanks.